Well said. Anywhere short too long, it starts irritating.
All right, we'll go ahead and bring to order the Board of Education Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Committee meeting. First on our agenda, we have our welcome from our committee chairperson, Stephanie Walker.
Thank you, Dr. Smith. It seems like only yesterday we met, which it seems like it was 2 weeks ago, as it probably was. But I'm very happy to have everyone back again, and thank you all for coming. I'm not going to waste too much time because we have a lot to get to. And the next thing on our agenda here is the equity audit discussion that Dr. Smith has got on here, and our guests, Suffolk Solutions, are here. Is it Stephanie or Smith here?
Yes.
Okay, Dr. Rodney's not here, just Stephanie. Not that I mind, Stephanie, I'm glad you're here. So I'll go ahead and just let you guys take it away.
So yes, so as you see on our agenda today, we want to unpack the results of our equity audit. And so we have with us our partners from Suffolk Solutions. So without any further delay, I'll turn it over to Stephanie Smith.
All right, thank you so much for gathering. Looking forward to being able to connect with you all as we return to Wilmington. I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to check in with Dr. Smith. I know that he was planning to log in as well. I want to make sure that he has the link. So what I'll ask Dr. LaShawn, if you can send that link to him one more time, and we'll go ahead and get started. So also feel free, I'm not sure if everyone has their own device to be able to type any questions in as we are moving forward, but feel free to make sure that you understand what is being shared today. So as a reminder, many of you all have been able to hear us talk about our guiding principles of equity, which we have gleaned from Brian Stevenson and his work. And so as we think about the equity audit, not only the report, but the process, I'll highlight a couple of these. One is with, not for. And so the really power of an equity audit, especially through this qualitative approach that we were able to leverage, it is really being able to hear and gather the perspectives from your constituents. And so we'll talk about, once again, the groupings that we were able to connect with for this equity audit. This also gives us a chance to get really proximate. And so once again, we recognize that different people can experience the same thing and have totally different thoughts or experiences from those things. And so this gives us a chance to help us really understand what are the various ways that our parents, our students, and even our staff and partners, how they've been able to differently interact with and engage. We see Dr. Smith on the screen. Stephanie, you got your wish. And so we are, so I think it's really important to be able to, I'm sorry, I thought I was sharing my screen. Can you all see the screen now?
We can.
Yes.
Oh, I'm so sorry. I thought I was sharing my screen. So I just wanted to highlight a couple of the guiding principles of equity, and we'll encourage you all to be open to new information, of course, open to how people have responded. And then also this reminder that for some, feelings of discomfort may be a part of it, but just a reminder that discomfort is not the same as danger. And so we ask you to stay open and receptive and be curious. I think curiosity is a really great feeling to be able to navigate through this report and of course through this work. This is just a reminder about the approach that we have from the very onset have committed to you all, that we will take this four-part approach. And so getting curious once again in these 4 areas, and the willingness to examine and to walk with. And when we talk about pedagogy, we're not just talking about curriculum, we're talking about really what guides the district in this work, which is important as well. Rodney, feel free to jump in if there's anything that you'd like to add as I move through. I really want to get to the body so that we can hear any questions. This is a reminder of, once again, the process and our commitment as we walk with you in this journey, and really where we are at and how, and our progress in this. And so we were able to join in and start our relationship March of 2021, gathering materials and understanding the surveys and assessments. So we had on-site visits this past June, and the equity focus groups actually began April, and we're able to run through May. So we're excited to be able to connect once again with all levels. And then we have this ongoing work of really being able to continue to walk with you all as you establish some benchmarks and you begin to operationalize this work. And so we'll continue to walk with you. In this DEIB, once again, diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. Recognizing that belonging piece is really important. And so would love to just hear from a few voices as to what, if any, of these 6 really stand out for you. And once again, want to lift up that we've had the privilege of being able to connect with both Stephanie and Hugh, along with Dr. LaShawn Smith in this. So Stephanie, Hugh, and LaShawn, feel free to speak up, especially as we give our other friends time to just process and read this information. So is there one or two that really stick out to you as you think about the task and the work of the EDI, what you're doing and what more will be required?
Well, I would say the first one, the perspectives and experiences of all individuals are not only welcomed, but are valued and respected. And I think, for us to make this commitment to the work, we have to be able to value all voices, even when those voices don't agree with ours.
Thank you, Dr. Smith. Others that you'd like to lift up?
Stephanie, this is the first time I think everyone's seen these, so they're probably busy reading. That's probably why you have a pause.
We always say silence is the sound of us thinking, so we have no problem with silence.
Is there anything on there that any of y'all kind of like can relate with or feel like speaks to you?
I really like the mention of ongoing efforts. So there isn't a moment where we'll be done. This is our constant work.
Yeah.
Absolutely. That's a great draw, because if we feel like there are just destinations in this work, then we miss our opportunity to continue to integrate, to evolve. And we talk about the importance of equity is to always to have that willingness to monitor and adjust along the way. Anything that is human-centered and equity-driven. So thank you for lifting that ongoing up.
Yeah, that's a really important one for us as well. And we sort of accentuate this one a bit. And we even couch it under this conversation between cultural competency versus cultural humility. And we've tended to, in recent years, lean toward this idea of cultural humility as opposed to cultural competency. And I know you may be thinking that that's a bit counterintuitive at the moment, but hear me out just briefly. So this idea of ongoing efforts, it's more akin to cultural humility as in we are always in an exchange with fellow man. We're always in exchange with others. We'll never reach this place of completion. with regard to diversity, equity, belonging, inclusion, all those things. We always remain open and humble enough to recognize that we don't know it all, but we are willing to always be in an exchange. So that's how we think of this. So it's a very important one.
And a reminder about the equity process. So once again, launching in March, some of you were a part of bringing groups together. So thank you for your contributions to this work. And really, once again, having this qualitative data, understanding the context, understanding the what behind the numbers that we may see. And so we were able to engage with 9 focus groups. As you can see, they were made up of faculty and staff, parents, administrators, and principals. Some of you all from the EDI committee, groups of students from elementary, middle, and high school, and then group of community partners. So the goal was to really have a holistic view, as holistic a view as possible, and being able to hear and understand the interpretations. A reminder of the questions, again, these are also in the appendix of the report. So if you want to be able to reference them, but these were the questions that were asked. And then these were our questions to our youth, being but all elementary, middle, and high school students were asked these questions in these ways. I will tell you, and some of you all have heard me say this before, and I should not be surprised because our children are brilliant, but the words that came from, the thoughts that came from our young people continue to be inspiring and remind us why this work is important. So shout out to you all that continue to shape our kids. So we'll walk into these themes the way we have this laid out. We'll talk about the themes. We'll even lift up some verbatim comments. And all of this and confidentiality was extremely important. So you'll see that there will be some quotes without who said what, which is really important in being able to create a safe space for this work to happen. And so our first theme is a clear DEIB stance and more district-wide conversation. So once again, this theme emerged from what we heard in response to the questions that were asked about what's needed.
Yeah, and admittedly, this one may be a challenge for you to hear, being that you are part of the EDI committee and you've been intimately involved in this work for a while. And so it may come as a bit of a surprise that there is those in your district who are not as familiar with this conversation. As you look at perhaps the second quote there, say, I've never heard the principal, PTA, or any leader talk about specifically about diversity in the district. And I know that may sound like a shock, but that is indeed, unfortunately, a sentiment in your district, that there are some people who have not been privy to the conversation, perhaps as intimately you have been. So that means that we need to, in some regards, over-communicate this idea of moving our district forward with regard to diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging.
Mm-hmm. And then, when we talk about, I think it's important to reiterate or to inform how things come about. Things don't come about because we heard them once. Things are generated because they are stated, the sentiment, concept, or even the wording itself was stated several times throughout the various focus group times that we have. And so I think that might be helpful to understand how things end up emerging as key themes. Your second theme is the need for inclusive curriculum and pedagogy. And so I'll roll this out again. And as you can see from the comments, and we'll even be sure to point out what especially came from our young people, which I think is really important for us to take note of, because it is our young students, our students across the board that are really living and engaging in this system. And so it's important that we listen and take heed to their words.
Yeah, and this one also, again, this kind of harkens back to Stephenie's earlier point when we talked about pedagogy, policies, practices, and peoples. So, we look at this notion of curriculum and pedagogy as more than just what happens in the written lesson plans. We look at this as the entirety of what happens when families and students engage with the educational environment. And so, that means that curriculum includes everything. Pedagogy includes everything that a family would encounter when engaging with your district. And so with that being said, you look at some of the comments toward the end, the three last quotes. Lyceum needs to be reformed. It is not equitable at all. The selection process is questionable. And surprisingly, the last three, including the one I just read, all came from students.
And so we want to draw attention, that the last one, sometimes I feel like I have to drop pieces of my identity to be successful. So once again, being thoughtful about not only the lessons that students engage, but the day that they have to navigate in order to be able to be receptive and ready and in a receiver mode for our lessons. So once again, really great opportunities that you all as a community have been working towards. And when I say community of EDI committee members have been working on. So our third theme, representation, teacher, staff, and administrator. In diversity, once again, really being able to lift up the importance of identity and students being able to see and hear themselves. Rodney,
Again,
you'd like to highlight?
Yeah. Again, I will accentuate the ones that I remember specifically that came from student voices. And again, the last three quotes again came from student voices, starting with, we don't have many Spanish-speaking teachers. And the two last ones are pretty powerful from my estimation. I want to go into education because I'm a person of color and I want students to see it and educate of color. So this was in response to the student acknowledging their lack of representation, particularly of of teachers of color in the district and teachers of color that this student had the opportunity to interact with. And the final comment really crystallizes the point of representation, whereas, my teacher's voice sounds like my mom's voice, and that makes me feel safe. As you can imagine, I came from an elementary student, but I think it's perhaps the most powerful quote that we receive of all the quotes and throughout our time spending in the equity audit, because it speaks to, again, this idea of representation. Now, what if there are students who go through the entire K-12 experience and never had that similar feeling of safety? And so this is a student, of course, that is feeling that, but what about the students who do not, or never have the opportunity to, right? In fact, I'm sitting actually in a classroom right now on a college campus where I teach graduate level courses, and there are several students in my course that would tell me this semester that I'm the first African-American teacher that they've had in their entire education experience. And I repeat, these are graduate level students I teach that are 25 years and older. And what a merit of it is that students will, feel a need first to share that with me, but also not just share that with me, but having had experienced that their entire K-12 experience. So we have to do something to address it.
And even recognizing that as we look at it, even through the various race and ethnicities that we were able to speak with, while we may intuitively think, perhaps some of us, that this first comment came from a parent of color, it actually came from a white parent, right? And so it talks about the importance of and the benefit of having representation, not only on your students of color, but the students, all your other students that are part of the school and that benefit from having different reflections of identity in front of them. How that too is a really great teaching for all of us. So strong thing right here. And once again, friends, because we can't see you, feel free to interject and let us know if you have any questions or comments. We want to make sure that we're being responsive. So thank you, Dr. LaShawn, for being our eyes in this case, our eyes and ears. We want to make sure we're pausing as needed.
And I'll let folks know that the tables are mic'd, so if you speak into the microphone, you should be able to be heard.
Thank you for that reminder.
Stephanie, you've got a question, are you?
Yeah, thank you very much,
Introduce
Stephanie.
yourself.
Hi, it's Kirsten, and I'm just wondering, first of all, thank you for the findings. This is very helpful and informative. And in the first set of findings about communication and focus and priority, I was really struck by that because I've been on this committee for about a year. I've been in the district for just a little over a year, and I don't hear the superintendent driving this message. I believe that this message is consistent with the superintendent's message. I believe that he's come to do this kind of work, but I don't hear it from the top down. And just as a member of this community and a member of this committee, I'd love to know that what I'm doing is in sync with the superintendent's vision and not something that's working against the superintendent's vision. So I'm wondering if you had any insights about the superintendent's voice in this and whether or not we'll hear from the superintendent.
Well, I'll leave that last question to Dr. LaShawn Smith, as we want to be careful to not speak on behalf of the superintendent. But what I will say is that from the onset, it has been my experience that Dr. Faust is extremely committed to this work and has been supportive and been an advocate for it, not only in what we have heard from others, but what I have experienced in working with. And so for me and my lens, so I appreciate your question from my lens, this feels very much aligned with it. And I think it goes into now practice. And from my view, and now moving into a year plus of engagement, seeing what some of the developments have been, so a new communications director, and other type of areas of focus that I really think further reiterate the importance of this direction. So that's from my view, and I'll look to Dr. LaShawn Smith to speak more about, or any other cabinet member to speak more about what's to come from the superintendent view.
Yeah, well, and I agree with you, Stephanie, and thank you for that. Dr. Faust very much supports this work. The audit itself was initiated because there was perceived a need. We want to make sure that we are meeting all the needs of all the students in the district. And I don't think that this work would be able to take place in the way that it has taken place in the district if not for the support of the superintendent.
Yeah, I would agree. And make sure I say it's Kristen?
Kirsten, yeah.
Kirsten,
Yep.
okay. Kirsten, Kirsten. Hi, Kirsten. I think that what is also important for us as we move into this work with our partners, a real key for readiness is the engagement of the superintendent in the process. Is the commitment of the superintendent to be receptive to what we are able to bring back and share. Otherwise, it feels very much, there could be so much resistance. So that helps us with our readiness. So Kirsten, that's a key component initially of us even being able to come into agreement into walking with organizations. And so I will say I've continued to be encouraged by that level of support. But I think, the second part of that is, what does the implementation look like? And so it is our hope that this report can be an additional tool to help with what those things are. And as we move forward, Rodney and I have to transition at 5 Central Standard Time, but it'll be our hope that we'll be able to get to the recommendations so that you can see how, once again, this report can serve as a tool to the how. How do we really begin to move forward? And you'll see some of these things you all are already in progress of. So the next key thing is increased community engagement. You have some of the quotes in the report. There are more quotes and also more narrative around these key things as well. Our intention with the slide deck is to give more of a high-level overview and point out some particular things. So please know and reference the report for a more detailed view of everything that we speak of. Rodney?
Yeah, this is a theme that was quite, I thought, insightful from many of your internal constituency groups that was quite aware of the need for a better connection to the surrounding community. In fact, many of them argue that, the surrounding community is central and even pivotal to having, to the success of the district, especially around this idea of infusing diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging in a more succinct and better way.
Yeah.
So I thought it was a pretty powerful theme as well, that there is a desire, both internally and externally, to be connected to what the district is doing. Because we heard, as you can see, some of the same sentiments coming from community partners who understood that the community is as strong as a strong district, that any great city has to have a great school district that's supporting it, and vice versa.
And you'll see this key theme really supported through recommendations that we have, but I'll just lift up the fact that, the school district is not a bubble, it's part of community. And so many of the things that we see and experience within the district we see and experience as a community. And so the power of being able to engage in this work, in this conversation, in creating a common language and shared perspective around how do we practice and be a place, an inclusive space, and really engage in inclusive practices that can help cultivate a culture of belonging. We know that needs to happen inside of our buildings, but also throughout our community. And so this is a really great opportunity to work in tandem. Then this other really key theme of a divided district. And this is where I think it's really important for all of us to pause and for some perhaps to even take a deep breath to really get to the essence of what this is about.
Yeah, to Stephanie's point, I think that this one perhaps also could be a challenge to hear and even read, but I think it would behoove us all to, absorb and take this particular theme with a very close eye and truly understand, I think, the sentiment behind it, because this is one of the more pronounced themes as we talk to various constituency groups throughout the audit process. And the one that sort of sticks with me, well, the two that sticks with me that's on the screen among many is dealing with the shooting that took place, I think, last year. And then also there was one family that was the mother of the family. I particularly remember her comment saying, we didn't choose a home until we chose a school. Unfortunately, we had to select education, equality over diversity. In other words, that the district is divided between what is perceived as an affluent part of the district and a not so affluent part of the district. This may come as a surprise to you, but may be familiar to some of you of hearing this particular sentiment.
And then equity training and professional development, and I would say overarchingly, going back to this ongoing learning space. So how can we be continual learners and begin to leverage our common language? These trainings serve as an opportunity to build common language and shared perspective and really begin to turn these concepts into practice. And so how we can do that And it is also, you know, it was great to hear many being interested in understanding the need for cultural training, just to help us understand the how and the why. So we can move from perhaps judgment to curiosity. We can move from judgment of why people do the things that they do, and instead really creating respect and space for those approaches in many ways, and being able to build out our practice and demonstration of cultural humility. And so it was really encouraging to hear this hunger. You know, we talk about the difference between aptitude and appetite. This really speaks to the appetite for this, the desire to get more and to continue to strengthen and deepen one's own understanding. And not only from a staff and adult level, but even interest as students to continue to increase understanding.
Yeah, I would agree with everything that Stevie said with regard to this theme. Not only do I believe that there is indeed an appetite for more of these kinds of conversation, I think the appetite leads to and even may speak to an already present aptitude that's in the district, meaning that you have some equity champions that have some skill set as well as some expertise to help further this discussion, to help further this work in the district.
Before we move to recommendations, I would love to pause for any additional questions or comments as it relates to the key themes. The floor is open.
I have a question. When we look at,
Are you able to hear Ms. Sidbury?
Can you speak more into the mic? You sound a little more distant.
okay, when we look at the divided district and increased community engagement, how much, because I think on a school level, a lot falls on the district to solve problems within a community that have been here. So through your conversations, has there been any insight from the community aspect of what they are willing to do to support the district in the EDI work?
That's a really great question. When we get into the recommendations, we talk about that. You know, what we recommend is alignment. That the district is not alone in really wanting to be really focused and intentional about this work, about creating more equitable outcomes and therefore practicing inclusion and really creating a culture of belonging. And so being able to come together and bring that brain trust together is a really great way to optimize or to leverage the effort and the interest in this work. And so as we move through the recommendations, we talk about that in the form of being able to assemble the business council and ensuring that we are leveraging the resource of our business partners and corporations to continue to support and uplift this. We know that so many of our parents are employees of these same organizations, and I think that can also help with alignment. Of really sinking in what is happening in the workforce and in and throughout the community and what is happening in and throughout our learning communities. And so I think that there's some opportunity there that we outline or reference in the recommendations, because I think you're spot on that the district alone will not be able to do this. But I think it also goes into how the district continues to leverage its resources to help to be a key coordinator and influencer in how just the city of Wilmington and beyond navigates this work. So I think this is a how question of the coordination efforts, but also a what, and how the district can also really be a key voice in setting priorities that can benefit the entire community. So I hope that answers your question. We'll talk about it a little bit more in the recommendations, but those are just some of my thoughts. Other questions about key themes? So we'll get into the recommendations as we talk about, we mentioned earlier the importance of district culture. And so we'll talk about it in the form of continuing engagement, equity code of conduct, really this kind of how do we support one another in behavioral modification. Once again, moving us from concepts. You know, we have really great trainings and engagements. We are aware of some key ones that you all have had, but how do we begin to now operationalize this? And how do we move from this culture of perfection to a culture of accountability? And what does that look like? And then, of course, examining harmful impact, being laser focused on the things that have and continue to create harm and addressing those as they are key impediments to building a culture of belonging. You are already unmuted, Rodney.
Yeah, I've noticed that. I think I will accentuate this idea of equity code of conduct as well as examining harmful impacts, like as we list there. We got more than a few comments about an event that takes place currently in the district called Colonialville that may be harmful to some constituency groups, both psychologically and perhaps even emotionally. So we need to think about those things, and then I think this code of conduct can begin to set some expectations around, how then shall we live as a district and as a community as we seek to further equity in our district and in our community.
I think the continued engagement in things like the restructuring or the expansion of EDI and how we can better engage the community that is already part of this work. And so with the addition of student voice, student work group, really being able to create more and broader support for parents who are very much interested in being a part of this work and growing and learning together. And so you also see some of that recommendation through some of the work that we've been doing with Stephanie Walker, your chair, and Dr. LaShawn Smith, and the recommendations that we had of expanding EDI and including your parent work group and your student work group. How do we begin to build out and expand our culture of accountability and leverage the brain trust and the interest that exists within our community? Our second recommendation is around district policies. And so really focusing on the support of school board, enhancing employee evaluation, and examining access.
Yeah, the first one reminds me especially this idea of, helping the school board examine policies and or practices. As you see, we list Lyceum again there, and the lottery system, if you will. And so there are two pretty prominent characteristics of the district and even activities or programs in the district that, perhaps we've conceded unknowingly, unwittingly to its inequitable outcomes. We sort of have just implicitly accepted the arrangement as it is, and I think that, and we think that there's a need to definitely re-examine these two very important aspects of the district. And then the second one, this idea of enhancing employee evaluation, using an equity-focused portion or theme that shows up in how we evaluate employees, our constituency groups throughout the academic year. Just like very similar to how we evaluate, their communication, their dealing with families, or, whatever you evaluate your teachers and employees on, why not include equity as part of that evaluation process?
Dr. Rodney Smith?
Yes.
We have a question.
Sure.
Go Go ahead, Kirsten.
It's related to this topic around policies. Because when we first formed the EDI, we had kind of split up some of the subcommittee work, and one of the areas was around policy. And then within, I don't know, a few months, our school board, I don't fully understand how it works, but I know that they started to, I guess would contract be the right word, Dr. Smith, with the North Carolina School Board Association in order to update the policy manual. So I guess I'm really curious about this recommendation and how it could be, implemented. Because I know, I would imagine that the School Board Association is, to put it frankly, probably less interested in equity and inclusion than we are overall, and they're probably more interested in making sure, that things are compliant and legal. So I'm just curious if that had come up at all, or if you had ideas around that within the recommendations.
Yeah, so directly not from the broader scope, but from your actual school board members being able to hear. And this recommendation is really steeped in the fact of making sure that there's alignment with proximity, meaning that how we leverage your elected and appointed school board officials and really being able to act that change where they can. And because things like your lottery school system, which parents have a lot of voice around lottery schools and the fairness or the access or not that they have to it, but that shift is really held by the board. And so really, one, effectively communicating who has access to do what, and then people, each group being able to really maximize and live in what their role is. And so this is a reminder and a prompting for really encouraging the school board to be able to leverage what it has access to do, because otherwise there could be a mismanagement of expectations internally and externally, what the parents can adequately expect from their building leaders, and so on and so forth, which continues to disrupt and be a barrier to trust and relationship building. And so that's what this is about. So I want to make sure that I'm answering and responding to your question as you intended, but also that we're clear about how these recommendations are coming forward or where they're coming from, kind of what's prompting. So feel free to clarify or get me straight if I was off, and then Rodney, you may have a response.
You have a question? Kirsten has a question.
Yeah, Stephanie, I thought that was an excellent response, and I really loved the question too from Casey. Really, really excellent. And so we know, right, as a group, school board members, you're wonderful people. You're dealing with so much right now, and you have two major responsibilities: hire the superintendent and set the policy for the district. And so when we learned that NCSBA is helping you to get your policies in compliance, that is fabulous. But I don't think we have any statements that we could hand to NCSBA that help us get to what our consultants are urging us to do. And I think they're urging us to do something really important. The thing is, internally, we're going to need to have a statement that says this is what we're aiming for. This is what we're aiming for in terms of hiring practices, in terms of demanding evaluation for equity competencies, in terms of student behavior and access to rigorous course taking regardless of your race, right? Regardless of your economic status. And so what I think we have to help you, Stephanie, the way you're helping us, by making a statement to clarify what our values are in that area.
That's spot on, Kirsten.
Yes, it is.
And that is what, and it happens, and it looks perhaps different or sounds different from the various perspectives. And so the school board has a lot of power in that ability, just as parents do. And so a lot of what you see in our recommendations, the specific recommendation about expanding the EDI is to create that room and align practice with proximity. Who's more proximate to doing what? And it is our belief that the board, it is wrapped around this policy discussion and engagement, while our staff team and community partners are really proximate in being able to shape practice. So what does this look like and how can it be delivered? And then of course, our students and families, and once again, even our district team members in being able to really shape outcomes, like what we do with what we've been told. And we believe that when we work collaboratively on those different scopes, on those different spans, that this has been when really we have this integration and this practice that is immersed, that is not separate and apart, but really, once again, going from what can I do to who can I be, right? And so that is that theory of change. So great question, and thank you, Kirsten, for connecting the dots. The third is really, once again, connected and really birthed out of one of the key themes, a clear communication plan. It was really great to be able to connect with Josh, and I look forward to continuing to work with him and the communications team, because this becomes really a linchpin of once again, coordinating and mobilizing internally and externally. And so these regular updates, once again, bringing this all together, helping community internally and externally understand how this work is part of our outcomes. It's not separate, it's what produces our outcomes. So if we're really serious and interested in quality education, then we move through that through an equity lens, right? And so that's what the regular updates are about, being able to strengthen the influence. We believe that when the district has a clear command of who and what we are doing and why, that will become very much so a gatherer for other constituents and other key leaders that you can really walk in step with. And then once again, this coordinated messaging, being very intentional, because sometimes it is just a matter of who has been able to say it first and the best that can either persuade or dissuade others. And so this coordinated message is extremely important so people can be clear about what this is about. Because sometimes the narrative of what it's not about becomes louder than what it is about. And so this is really important as it helps us have continuity in our work, so we don't have to have starts and stops, and also so that we can stop being so reactive and instead really be able to move forward with clarity, that this alignment, that more equitable outcomes is quality education. And because we are committed to quality education for all of our students, we know that equity is our pathway for that.
Yeah, I think this one is, I think it speaks to, again, the first key theme that we identified, this clear DEIB stance with regard to the district. And so I would suggest here an incessant over communication of what the district is doing around your diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging efforts. I would, in an emphatic voice, an emphatic message being sent out, because as we all know, perception is reality. And if there's a perception that there's not any conversation going on, well, that becomes the reality of the district. And so we have to be that much more intentional about, making sure that the message is being disseminated properly. Now, not leaning toward this idea of spinning information, right? Being truthful and transparent about what we're doing, but not moving toward this idea of spin.
Yeah, clearly stated, there has been a clear conflation between CRT and anything that is going on. So I want to be very clear, and I want to be direct about what I'm talking about. And that's important, because if not properly communicated, then it can serve to be a distraction and a deterrent from moving forward. And if we believe, we do SOFIC, that an equitable approach is the equivalent of being able to produce quality education for all, then we want to be clear about that. And it'll be important for us to be able to lead with that and not just constantly, react in that particular scenario and then perhaps in others as well. Equity training and professional development, really understanding axiology, cultural responsive pedagogy, which we spoke to when we hear students saying, when I hear my mommy's voice, I feel safe, or I have to leave pieces of myself out in order to be successful. So we hear that, and then these deep dive discussions. And I'll start there with deep dive discussions because I think that as we expect our caring adults within our buildings to be a champion or to be there for our students, it is important that we are there for our colleagues and our team members, that we are providing safe places not only for our colleagues to learn, but also for they themselves to be able to process. And so the power of deep dive discussions is that it is a key processing method. It's part of the method of discovery and development to be able to process. That we don't want to make any assumptions that this work or practice is intuitive. In fact, we know it isn't. So it takes practice. And so this is just a really key component of how can we support and walk with our caring adults within our learning community and being practitioners of equity. That we have to create safe spaces for us to all be able to learn and grow and begin to transform or replace our previous narratives with the new ones that we can practice and establish. Our brains are meaning-making machines. Just like we wouldn't expect our students to go to one day of algebra class and have it, surely we won't be able to expect our colleagues and partners in this work to do it. And so making sure that we're really setting a table and providing the proper supports to really ensure that our teachers, or like I said, our caring adults, can have questions of the day that continue to norm, this is just an example, but that can continue to norm these conversations so that when something happens, teachers would be more inclined to engage in facilitating dialogue instead of practicing avoidance because of their own insecurity about being able to successfully navigate these topics and discussions. It is clear that our students want to talk, they are interested and need to talk about these things. It becomes disruptors to them throughout their class day if something has gone on in the community or nationally, and they are made to feel like they have to pretend it didn't happen because they're not having direct conversation about it, right? And so this is that deep dive discussion is an important component of that.
And I suspect that some of you are perhaps even thinking that, okay, where and what time in our busy schedules of the school day, of the school year, can we invoke, bring up some of these deep dive discussions. And I would suggest or argue that we could perhaps try to infuse into our weekly huddles or our monthly huddles or how frequently we get together as a school building. And we have to include a conversation around equity as we include conversations around, student progress, as we include conversations around the district's budget. And, we have to include equity in those conversations as well.
And then you all will be able to read more about the culturally responsive pedagogy and the axiology piece, but once again, really helping to close the gap in what we say and what we do. So really providing that support. This building up inclusive curriculum, once again, meaningful support, drawing the circle wider, and once again, examining and aligning. And you'll see this examination being in many of the recommendations, because once again, as we move away from a culture of perfection and move towards a culture of accountability, it'll be really important for us to ensure that the behaviors that we are expecting that really helps to cultivate a deeper sense of belonging and of the practice of inclusion, that we want to make sure that we have proper evaluation and touch points so that we can more adequately support our colleagues and partners in this work. Rodney, do you have more to add?
Well, this one is pretty much I guess a self-explanatory recommendation with regard to, this notion of drawing the circle wider in the middle that you see here, where we expand the images that students, achievements and histories, if you will, that students have access to. And how do we do that? Well, we go through an audit perhaps of the actual physical curriculum material, the lesson plans that we roll out to our students. I think that this is also an ongoing and constant evaluation, if you will. We're not ever at a place of completion saying, oh, well, we got the curriculum in place, or we got the library situated to be as equitable as possible. No, you're always evaluating and reevaluating, attempting to include more perspectives, more voices into this conversation.
And this meaningful support is, as the district continues to add or expand duties and roles, making sure that there is a sight line, that we're not doing these things by name only, but in practice, that there are clear and pathways for team members to be able to leverage their skill set and their influence on these key components. So connecting the Chief Equity and Inclusion Officer or the individual that has a similar role, and being able to walk with and be able to shape that curriculum along with others that hold that responsibility. The community engagement is really built out through some of the pieces that I previously referenced. The EDI Business Council, we think this is a key strategy to really being able to convene and build this network. Establish parent engagement office. We also talked about the expansion and the launch of parent work groups through the EDI experience, and then English language learner teams. And so really expanding this out so that it can be in tandem with what we're seeing in our population growth. And then this equity and inclusion leadership position, the importance of support and accountability, this community partner engagement, and also support cross-training. This is really key. I'll highlight, because our time is dwindling, about community partner engagement. Once again, culturally responsive or inclusive partnerships is a key strategy of being able to do this work well. Having someone that wakes up every day thinking about this goes a long way and really is reflected in your outcomes. And so I always feel really compelled to lift up the work that Dr. LaShawn Smith is doing. I continue to be amazed by the movement that this work is having, especially understanding all the other responsibilities that she has.
Yes.
So kudos again, Dr. Smith. And she did not ask me to say that. She probably is bothered that I even mentioned it. But I think it's important to note that, because imagine not having a CFO, but expecting us to be a fiscally sound district. Imagine not even having a learning and curriculum specialist, and expecting our teachers to just continue to evolve and move with the curriculum needs, right? So we understand already now the importance of having pointed leadership towards things that we have prioritized, and this is no different.
In a perfect world, we would have someone in this position whose sole responsibility is diversity, equity, and inclusion. Right? And that's all that person would do on a day in and day out basis. And if that's not possible, at least identify someone that's their primary responsibility, and then the other duties and responsibilities are secondary to that primary responsibility of helping the district better understand and better infuse equity and inclusion and diversity and belonging into the workplace, into the environment, into the community.
So while we recognize that this is just a continuation of this conversation, but we did want to be able to provide at least some context to the words that are on the pages that will be in the report. And as I stated, we have to roll off here and continue to move forward. But I do want to pause if there's any key questions, Rodney, if you need to go ahead and roll off, please do so. But if there's any key questions or considerations that I can at least hear and note, and then as Dr. Smith and I, Dr. LaShawn Smith and I meet weekly, I'll be interested in, of course, the continued engagement with Stephanie that we can continue to connect the dots. So any key thoughts or considerations that you'd like to share before we transition?
The only thing that, this is Stephanie Walker, the only thing I was thinking about was we are gonna have a discussion about workflow. And I think, Dr. Smith's done a great job of putting together an initial kind of, strategy for that. And we have to expand on that. But, a lot of the key things in your, in the audit are in this workflow. And I guess, I don't know if it's more of a question of, or hopefully we can touch base with you if we need to. Because it's kind of a restructure, but it's an important one. And we want to make sure that we are doing it properly and that we're doing it according to this wonderful audit that was done. And if you guys meet weekly, maybe that'd be the best way to get questions, because time is running out.
Absolutely. Feel free to share those, and we'll be sure to be responsive. Stephanie, thank you for lifting up the workflow. What is in tandem, and Dr. LaShawn Smith, get me right if it hasn't been yet disseminated, is that workflow goes in tandem with that expanded EDI recommendation that we took some time to customize in partnership with Dr. LaShawn Smith and Stephanie, your chair. And so those two tools go together, and be happy to really at a future time come and really talk through what some of the benefits are and how you all can support that as you roll out in the program year.
Thank you. Does anybody have any more questions? No?
If I can lift up a point as a
Sure.
person of the audience.
Sure.
One of the things that many people who are working on this very task of more belonging and things of that nature is for this to permeate more into the school buildings. And so we're grateful for Dr. Smith, we're grateful for this team and the workforce group, but we're grateful even more so for the plan that is continuing to go forth. But I think one of the things that we're hearing on the school level is when is it going to when is it going to continue more for us and help us? Because I think some teachers have come to a reality that there is a need for change, that there is a need or for a shift, for growth. And so that plan will help. But I'm so glad to see that was a part of the recommendations. And I think it's very well anticipated, expected.
Mm-hmm. No, thank you for that. And I'm just putting up for Sightline that this is what, we had talked about and will continue to, monitor and adjust as we move forward in this work. But that position and placement is extremely important when we begin to really drive towards what this looks like and expand that circle. Once again, expand that culture of accountability. So we look forward in continuing to build out relevant and practical tools that really help us become better implementers of these concepts. So thank you all again for your time and attention and for the work and the ground that you had to plow for even this to happen today. So thank you all.
Well, and thank you, Stephanie, and thank you, Dr. Smith. I think he's already gone. We really appreciate your time. We really appreciate this work. And we look forward to the benefits to all students. And I think my major takeaway was where you said or shared, equity is our platform for which we achieve a high quality education for all students. And that is truly our goal.
Well, thank you so much, and I appreciate it. Look forward to next steps.
All right,
Thank
take
you.
care.
Thank you.
All right.
Just a follow-up question. I didn't want to keep them because I knew they had that 5 o'clock hard stop. But since our last meeting, has there been any update on where we stand as far as a chief equity officer or how we can move forward with that?
That's what we're here to talk about. That's what I've got on the agenda here for an action item. I feel like this would be the perfect opportunity for us as a group to have a recommendation, put a timeline on it. I've got some notes that I have thoughts on where we can begin. And when you look at the workflow chart that Dr. Smith they came up with, when we talked about the EDI committee as kind of a group that it kind of pushes the work, but the work group itself is the one that does the work and brings it back to us for recommendation. And I think we can lead that work and then get the recommendation and bring it up to the board. And I really think, I mean, it's on the agenda to talk about. If we've got about, what is it, 20 more minutes? If we go ahead and get Casey's update real quick, and then we will talk about that. I got some good notes. And
Yes, okay, so I'm trying to think since the last time. Well, Dr. Smith and I just talked this afternoon after Ms. Walker, Mr. McManus, Dr. Smith, myself, and Dr. Faust had a chance to meet, which is what we discussed at our last EDI meeting. So that was a productive time with him. It's clear that he was in support of, the current efforts. He asked good questions around, what's kind of structures are currently in place and how that integrates. But at this point, it's a matter of asking that organization to map out a very clear contract and then connect them with Dr. Smith and Ms. Cherry Smith in order to bust out those details financially and legally. So add anything to clarify, Dr. Smith, if that's I'm understanding correctly.
No, I think that's exactly where we are. So.
And this is the student work group that was looking to be a part in compensation.
You asked the question last time about the students, like how many students, I think is what you were asking.
The number of students, because it was like a $3,000, I guess.
$3,000 per month, so total $15,000.
Okay. Oh, okay. All right. And so, yeah, how many students were they?
They said that they would definitely be, they would want to allow any student who wanted to touch the process to have that opportunity, which is what I anticipated, that they would be like very inclusive about the process, and that they thought it would be good to have a core group of 5 to 15. So part of what like Dr. Faust talked about was he wanted to make sure that students that he currently already kind of works with, that Ms. Clegg helps coordinate in terms of the Superintendent Student Advisory Council, that they would have an opportunity to have access to that. That's also been brought up in this space before with the student equity groups that do work in middles and highs, that if they, teammates here have referenced like making sure that they had that opportunity, or at least were aware of that opportunity. So that's 5 to 15 total core who would be like committing, I think, but it's still being open and inclusive for any student who wanted to touch the process.
So they can be reps. Is that?
Be what?
They can be additional like representatives.
Yeah, like their door's wide open.
So I was going to say too, with the workflow chart that we have here, there is a component of a student advisory section. And I know Dr. Faust talked about his own student advisory group, but this could be part of this component too with EDI. And I think that would be a good place for that group, because they're going to focus more on, the EDI stuff, bringing that up. Because, Dr. Faust's group, obviously, he has a little advisory group of students as well, but what we were talking about was having that student-led kind of like discussion on equity and inclusivity as well. And if we can incorporate it into our workflow chart, that would be even better. Okay, anybody have any more questions about that? You?
The recommendation from solutions for a position, it appears that's a recommendation, correct?
Yeah, we're getting ready to talk about that. Did you have any more questions for this stuff, or for the student group?
Well, that was what I was going to comment about.
Okay.
That was brought up in the same meeting about
Okay.
potential position.
Okay, that's great. Well, good, that's a good
So that's
segue.
why I was going to say, that's their recommendation, and we recommended, and we've done all our homework.
Great, okay.
I just have a quick follow-up, or
Go ahead, Paul.
I guess additional. When we think about a chief equity officer, where would their position fit within the district? will we look at that as part of instruction, part of that as human resources, or would they kind of be their own separate entity?
The recommendation from SOFIC was that they were part of upper administrative management, and that is something that we as this group need to come up with.
Okay.
So like I had.
Because I think that's important, because that's a conversation we've even had within our school, you know, with
Yeah.
my principal talking about equity work and where do we house it, and the fact is, when you look at equity work, it's got to dabble in everything. It's got to be a part of instruction, it's got to be a part of human resources, it's got to be part of it all.
Communication.
What,
Communication, everything, yeah.
it kind of, in our discussion, I feel like it's kind of treated as an elementary arena, but we still don't have all of our schools with equity committees meeting. Is that correct?
To my knowledge, I would think so.
Is
I
that
know it's
correct?
not
Is
every-
that incorrect information?
So what I can speak to is the schools that were trained. We provided equity training, formal training to 23 of our 45 schools. They ran the continuum of high school, middle school, and elementary schools. If you're talking about student teams, in our student teams, we have groups of students meeting in middle schools and high schools. And then through our work group, it is, of course, Christy Howe, yay, remember. Christy Howe is part of a group who's leading the student equity work that looks very different at the elementary level than it does at the middle and high school level.
Okay, so I was thinking before I got here that we as a committee could have a discussion about, because if we're going to make a recommendation to the board, and as a whole, I would think we would need to come up with the title, the job description, where they would touch on, like what are the financial implications, because that's something the work group can do. And I think that's what the intention was with the workflow chart, that we could, and I think Dr., correct me if I'm wrong, we as a group could come up with what we wanted to recommend or what we're moving towards, and the work group is going to do a lot of that groundwork and research and communicate with the committee at large before we bring the action to the board.
So just thinking about kind of the overall scope of work, and one thing that resonates with me that Stephanie said also tonight is about getting proximate to the problem. And then I actually looked at Kirsten because I remember her saying something very similar to that very early on in our meetings. And so it's really difficult for EDI to impact practice at schools because so many of you actually sit outside of schools. And so what it would be is that our work groups who are, nested in schools, these are the staff members, these are the folks who are doing the work, would meet and build out practices, and then quarterly, or however we choose that EDI would meet, would bring and present to the EDI board level committee. And then from that overall presentation, EDI would then decide on what they would lift up as a recommendation to the board. And so that would be the workflow. And so all along the way, you'd have student voices as a part of that, you'd have parent voices as a part of that, and then at some point, we would also have that business advisory as a part of that. So by the time it got to EDI, it would have been in touch by our classified staff, our certified staff, our students, our parents, our community. So what you heard as a presentation really was a representative of all those individuals in a very collective kind of way. And then from that, EDI then decided what they wanted to lift forward and bring forward to the board around policy or direction to the superintendent.
So I really, really like this. This makes sense, and I see what you're doing, like gathering the stakeholders and making sure that whatever the direction is, it is driven by stakeholders. And then there's a piece, maybe you've covered this, but it's what I didn't hear, and so I'm just wondering, I was thinking in terms of setting up the position for success, it might be great for the board to have a policy that, or at least a resolution that directs the superintendent to create this office. And then that in the creation of this office, it is intended to meet these values declared by the board based on some of this early stakeholder work. The position then reports to the superintendent, and all I'm trying to get in there is kind of the chain of command, that the person in charge knows who they report to.
Yeah.
And that's the superintendent. And the superintendent has been directed by the board to achieve a set of outcomes and create a representative process, right? And so that's how your workflow gets basically launched. It's through the procedures that follow this policy that directs the creation of the office. Does that make sense?
We're probably saying very similar things.
Good,
I
perfect,
would
just
point out
perfect.
With my thoughts on this is if we as a committee, as a board committee, want to bring action out, we can ask, I mean, this would probably be our first project if we wanted to, and I know Chris had talked about this, basically I personally would like to see if we can, I mean, I hear what you're saying about the superintendent being the one that runs this, but as an EDI committee, I think it would be a good recommendation, especially if we could do the bulk of the work where we can kind of lay the groundwork with what we feel would be the workflow, with the job description, the duties, the regular, if we want regular reports. I mean, and then in the end, the superintendent will be in charge of that person for sure.
Well, see, and that's right. So the superintendent is directed by the board to supervise this person, to provide these things to the committee, that's fine. If we are the de facto supervisors of this person, I just don't see how it will work.
No, I meant just like the recommendation. But when I say that, we bring the recommendation to the board and it will be filled out with, if we send it to the work group and say, okay, what are the budget implications? What is the timeline, is what I'm saying.
If we're sending it to the work group though, aren't we doing it backwards? I feel like this is something that the work group has already brought here and said, hey, we want an equity officer. Like, that's what I'm saying as a member of the equity work group. We want an equity officer. So no, I have it here with EDI, so I want
if we
EDI
just-
to now do
And so
something or.
If I understand what Kirsten is saying, what she's proposing is that the EDI bring to the board a recommendation for a resolution that then leads to all these other actions.
Yes. But tip it from the board to the superintendent down, because we know it came from the work group on up already.
Exactly. That's what-
Well, and well, it came from the work group, but it also came from the audit as well. I mean, I suppose what I was thinking was that we could do a lot of the work before we brought the recommendation. So it would be like, we know what we're looking for, we know what we want.
Clear and concise.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking, and it's fine either way, because, we're gonna end up, I would imagine, with the recommendation anyway. It's just, it's almost a way of saying, here it is, this is what we need, this is what I think the position will do. It's like, the want and desire is there, but none of the description is there, none of the network of the positions there.
So I
Yeah.
guess I would ask then, who's in charge of creating job descriptions within the district to begin with? Would this not fall on them? Yeah, so
Well, I think us
once
partners with
it's
HR.
directed by the EDI to tell and taken to the board and the board directs the superintendent, then wouldn't the superintendent thus turn it over to HR, which members of the equity work group are on HR to create that job description and outline it with things? And then bring that to the board to
Yeah, I mean,
discuss?
it really makes sense for HR to be responsible for the job description and, we can recommend a reporting structure.
To create it completely on our own, because so many other organizations and agencies around this city and around the state and the country already have definitions for those positions. And, because we're an educational institution, we just want to make sure that we're
So how
addressing
about
that part of it.
we make the recommendation to the board that we want this. The board then directs the superintendent, says, hey, this is where we're going now. Now let's have HR create this. And then HR could even share that back out with us for us to review and see. And then,
So, yeah, I was thinking about it in a different way, but I was like, I guess in my mind, I want it to be voted on and decided it's gonna happen. I don't want it to get to a point where, I take all yours point, you're right, that's where the work's gonna be done, the bulk of it is in the work group. But I just wanted a timeline stuck on it. It's like you say, we don't want this to go on and on, like, we can recommend it, but we have to say, well, tell us by X date, you know, what you have ready for us.
So I think my question to the board representatives here would what information do you feel the board would need to be able to vote on it, to take the vote? Because I think I would suspect a lot of people support it in this committee. We just would want to make sure the board is going to be equipped to make a decision. And so what do you guys feel like, what information would you feel?
I think that it would be, the best approach would be to recommend for the position, the development of the responsibilities would come. I don't think that's the hard part. I think I agree with her that the recommended position now, while there may be the flexibility in any of budget arenas, and then go from there with the responsibilities, of which the superintendent has said he supports it, and I believe he does, and so that development should not be an issue.
Yeah. Well, we want to grab it when we can, because like I say, budget talks start early in the new year.
Yeah.
And, you know, I guess we don't have to have everything decided before, but I just want to, it's almost like I want to make sure that it doesn't just get, okay, well, we recommend this, go, and like, we don't want to miss that window.
So would it be possible, and I don't know like what the timeline is for getting stuff on the agenda, but having at the board meeting tomorrow during committee saying, hey, I have an update from EDI. EDI committee recommends that the district starts working on creating an office for equity, or at least that chief equity office position. So that recommendation is made, you say that recommendation during committee reports. Then is that something that can be voted on again tomorrow night, or is that something that we can say, and we'll bring you next month more details and our ideas about what that looks like?
It definitely can be brought up under committee reports. That's not a problem. It's not an actionable place on the agenda, but we can make sure, we have an interim meeting, and we can definitely make it an agenda item. I know if you will second it or first it, whichever one he prefers. And I don't want to just go in there with, oh, this is what EDI recommends. I want to be able to have a robust discussion over it. And I know we're going to have everything kind of figured out by then. But, you know, we do have recommendation from the work group. We have recommendation from, you know, the equity report. And,
So
you know,
maybe say, and when we're also presenting the Suffolk Solutions report to it, saying, hey, this is the background for it. It's not just a recommendation of the work group of the EDI committee, it's also recommended by Suffolk Solutions. And then whether it's the interim meeting in October, or whether it's the regular meeting in November, we will have more to present. And even like, I know a year ago in November, we did a equity presentation to the board in November. It was about 10 slides me and Jennifer put together and was presented. And we can do that in another one in November that rolls off to what else we've been doing for this past year, and end that with, this is our recommendation for this position. So there's our timeline. We make the board aware in October. We present all of our findings mid-October or the first meeting in November. And then that puts us within that time to get the ball running with looking at budget that's coming
yeah, I
up.
say the sooner the better on the recommendation. I think there's a will there, and I think I say we just want to pin it down. We don't want to be like, oh, let's do this when, you know, when we feel like that. I like the idea of having a more robust presentation instead of a recommendation, because I know we all recommend it, but, you know, having something for visual is big for a lot of people, having it presented. You know, perhaps like bring it up under committee reports and then have something ready by regular meeting November.
And I just say, like, bring it up in committee reports, just, I think it's something to kind of go ahead and make sure all board members know, hey, this is coming your way. This is what we're talking about. This is what we're coming strong and hard, and we're going to want you to seriously consider and recommend that this moves forward come mid-October or the first November meeting. Sorry, Lena.
No, you're fine, because this is me and my teaching head thinking how to put a project together. So when we have all these paths that we've been doing for almost 2 years now, or past 2 years, I don't even remember how long. But we can bring all that information, because this is not something that is coming out of the blue. We are having all this history behind us, trying to work as a work group, then creating the EDI committee. We can create a solid timeline of the progress that has been done in the past, and in each stage when we got all this training for the community at large, when we have it for teachers, when we have it for the students, the creation of these groups. Now, then we have this audit that was kind of, okay, we decided that it's time for us to see if we are going the right way. And now we have this audit that is giving us, it's more like a consolidation of the things that we knew had to happen. And now we have the evidence from this audit. So that is solid evidence right there. We can put all that information in 10 slides. And we said the way we presented in the 5 minutes of the committee report is that we have enough evidence to support this, and we are going to present it when you give us a time. So something very precise to start, they are serious about this, with that information, and then we put it together and present it strong.
Yeah, I like that one.
Yeah, and alongside what Lena is saying, in terms of the evidence, it'd be great to do the political work of a conversation with your board chair, to make sure the board chair is on board with this, which I think the board chair will be, right? Because the board chair is actually going to shepherd a lot of this the rest of the way. And the superintendent has input. Like, we hired this, or you hired the superintendent, and you trust him to run the district. He will define what the office does and hire the person in the office.
Can I? Oh.
Go ahead. You go. No, go ahead.
I would just want to ask Dr. Smith, is there a name, because you're deputy superintendent as your position, then of course Dr. Faust superintendent. Is there a way to formulate it so that both of you are part of that conversation, or both of you are part of that oversight? Because I feel like you've done so much work in the district, and you've been involved in this work so many years, that I feel like I would personally like to see that you have some leadership in that as well, along with Dr. Faust, that, advising and making sure that there's some oversight there as well.
So what I'll say is, I think if the direction comes from the board chair, if there's a resolution that's adopted from the board, and the direction given to the superintendent, and this position becomes one that sits on senior staff, we all work very collaboratively, in a very shared way in terms of, our work and how we ensure that it's interconnected. And I think you spoke to that a little bit earlier, speaking specifically about equity within your school. So I think what you described will definitely be a part of this process. But I think it is, the devil is in the details, getting it to the point where that direction, that recommendation is made, whether it's for a position or it's for a resolution, and then the direction given to the superintendent. So I think once we get to that point, what you've described will come to fruition.
Okay. What is the timeline for this, I guess for the overall process for the position? Is it for the next school year, 2022? 2023, okay.
So
That's
July
what
1 of 2022.
Correct, you're looking at a budget timeline.
Well, maybe a state budget will pass, yes.
Well, lots of
Well,
we want lots of time, I think, to be able to actually do the interview process. And anyone that works in schools right now knows that trying to fill any position right now is difficult.
Yeah.
So we want plenty of time to be able to interview candidates. And I would hope that this committee, this interview process would look something like, make sure they're going through the work group, they're going through the EDI board, because I feel like that's going to be a good cross-section of the district, and of course, senior leadership as well.
But I think when budget discussions start, because that's when we need to have a clear, January, right? So we have until then to have that idea.
That's why we
Yeah.
have that recommendation,
So,
hard recommendation.
We really are thinking November, December, and
Got some work to
decision.
do between now and February.
Yes.
Well, I'll say a lot of times initial conversations begin in November.
Yes.
So that's perfect.
Yeah, so a lot of this,
We're
I
gonna have to
love
wrap
this.
up soon,
You're
but go ahead.
teaching me how important bottom-up is in this group. I love that. And I'm thinking, some of these decisions are already in the backs of people's mind who will put them on the budget, right? Some of the that some of the conversations have already happened, right? And things are moving, wheels are already turning. So we just want to figure out who has the power to get it over the finish line and back those people.
So Dr. Smith, our next meeting is November 1st. That's the day, obviously, before the first regular meeting in November. At this point, are we recommending the committee that it goes to the work group? And I know I put all the work on the Chris or whatever for the presentation, but you guys could probably come up with something. If you need anything from the committee, I mean, I guess reach out to us for the presentation. This is where I'm feeling, because we're not meeting for another month, but so I feel like all this time in between, when I bring it up, you and I bring it up tomorrow night in the committee report, because it'll be about a month.
Well, is it possible to schedule a extra meeting this month?
Well, I would offer, I don't think we have to formally meet as a committee for us to have continuing conversations.
Okay.
Or like a subcommittee meeting or?
Yeah, Chris, if you need any support or eyes, I'm happy to help. But I think that we can make the recommendation like right now. And
Yeah.
it's just what's the prep for you guys for the November meeting.
And maybe make a recommendation and say, we'll have a formal presentation at the November 1st meeting. Is it possible to do it that
They
way?
give us agenda time. You know.
Yeah, of course.
Well,
Yeah.
right, we have to get that, that's true.
The formal recommendation went after, the presentation is had, and it will be an action item, agenda item. Won't just be for information purposes.
Right.
I mean, and if we have to, we can put a further discussion on the interim meeting, on the board, just for information. And then by the time November rolls around, it can be an action item. But
Yeah, and you'll check, right? You'll check with Ms. Adams and with Dr. Faust
don't
about
worry.
what they actually
Don't
need
worry,
from
it'll all be
us.
done. We are probably over time, right, Dr. Smith? So we want to go ahead and close out. I wish we had more time. There were some things on the agenda that we can probably revisit next time. So if there are any more questions, I'm sure we can meet up on email or whatever we need to between now and that time. So thank you all for being here.
Yes,
Do you
thank
have any
you.
closing thoughts, sir?
How was Amsterdam?
Oh, gosh. It was good and stressful, but thank you very much. I liked your vacation pictures too.
I feel like it's another productive meeting.
Yeah.
Back to back, feels like a lot of the conversations we've been having for like the last 18 months are
Yeah.
starting to pay off, so.
We need to reach out to people that aren't here too, like maybe make a phone call and see how people are doing, because there's a lot of people not here.
Okay. All right, you guys. Thank you for a very good meeting. I appreciate
Thank
it.
you.
And we'll meet again soon.
Hi, Kristen.